Thank you for joining us for another BDSM United podcast in our slave training series. It's just a new and improved slave training. I hope you've been enjoying these podcasts. We've been enjoying bringing this information to you. It's a lot of new information from our previous slave training series. And when we learn something new, because we're always learning new things, we like to pass those things off on to you. Today, we want to talk a little bit more about kind of unfolding this slave training. Now, the area or space a slave is occupying should be controlled. In the early stages of slave training, control their space and where they're to be at all times. Restricting the slave to an area and requiring permission to go beyond that area is an example of owning the space a slave occupies. Owning the slave's space can be enhanced by things like caging, restricting where they eat and sleep, and restricting the use of furniture. Bondage can also be a powerful restrictive tool for controlling space. Tying their legs or their leg or their legs to a bedpost at night is an example of strict control of space. When a slave is not actively serving, place the slave in a waiting status. It may be that this slave sits at your feet or in a corner until called. The slave's body is actively controlled at all times by using this process. It's not efficient slave management and long-term service because it restricts the ability to do routine tasks, because a lot of times in 24/7 relationships, there's a lot of life involved, and just the stuff of life is involved in the relationship as well, and in allowing the slave to do the things that they know will ultimately please you, and to perform tasks and to do service oftentimes is good for your relationship, and is a good use of the slave's time. But early in the slave training process, putting a slave in waiting and waiting for them to for you to call them to be used is a really good training technique. In addition, these methods can be used uh, for training or punishment. Restricted body movement in training teaches the slave to follow orders they would not otherwise follow. This is present tense training, not future oriented controlling a slave space by caging. Controlling space can be thought of as controlling where the slave's body is at all times, or placing restrictions on the distance that it can be from you. There must be a reason when slave's body is beyond the distance limits you establish for it. You can park the slave and make it wait until the next time you need your instrument. Behavioral slave training can be at times nothing more than ordering your object to be silent and still as it's waiting your next order. Not doing this is a missed training opportunity to control slaves' time and space. The term space includes the personal space of a slave. A slave really has no personal space that is separate from the master. For a slave, the term personal space no longer applies. It is all the master's space. Now, controlling a slave's time means you can, one, set times for activities and its availability for those activities. Two, you can control a period at the slave's disposal for its own use. Three, you can set or maintain the tempo, the speed, or duration of time used to complete activities. Time is no longer owned by the slave. The object learns to abide by the time schedule set and managed by the master. Free time is a privilege granted to the slave. Early in the training, the slave should be allowed little free time and should be kept busy serving the master. A slave can be parked while awaiting new orders. The slave has probably operated most of its life on its own time schedule and has to adjust ways of thinking to abide by your time schedule. Establishing time schedules for activities and restricting activities the object can perform without permission are also ways you can control its time. You can also order the slave to do some tasks at the same time every day. This is effective during the period it is learning that you own their time. If slave always does a task at a particular time and place, then you can change the time or place the slave does it. This reinforces your control. Sit slave on the floor and place an old clock that ticks loudly beside it. You want it to be able to hear it and see the time displayed. Tell it she has to remain and watch the hands on the clock slowly move. Make the slave stay in that place, tortured by the slow movement and sound of the clock. This reinforces that you control its time and its space. In our next podcast, we'll talk more about controlling your slave. I'm Primal Piggy. Really, the best place to find all of our resources is our website, which we recently, not too long ago, updated. It is bdsmunited.com. If you're listening on your favorite platform, we ask that you like, you subscribe, you do give a thumbs up, you react in some way to our podcast to tell others what you think of it. This is a way for you to connect with us because we oftentimes read those things, but it's also a way for other adults in our lifestyle to find these types of BDSM resources. Because when others are educated, it makes our whole community better. So thanks for playing your part in that kind of improvement. I've enjoyed talking to you today, and I'll talk to you again soon.